Chapter 19. Sunnies. "I wonder what they're planning to start for dinner," Francie said, peering into the brown paper grocery bags. "It seems we have all the ingredients with us." When she glanced up, Nels was looking at her. She quickly redirected her gaze back into the bags, but she was left with the distinct impression he was smiling. "It seems sort of strange to be shopping for olive oil and shore lunch, whatever that is," she said, eliciting a raised eyebrow from Nels, "when my aunt is the prime suspect in a murder." "Tell me how that happened," he said. While Nels parked his truck in Sandy's lot, Francie filled him in about the scene at the church. She explained how the sheriff had been at the funeral luncheon. He made everyone still there stay for questions while he sent samples of the funeral food off to a lab somewhere for testing. "Why would he suspect foul play?" Nels wondered, whipping off his dirty t-shirt. "Exactly," Francie said, trying not to gape. "And then some sort of information arrives that makes him decide to take Astrid in for questioning." "Question her right here," I said. But no, the sheriff was going to take her in. Francie tried to keep her mind on the thread of her story while Nels rummaged around in the back of his truck for a different, rumpled but clean shirt. While he pulled the shirt over his head, she actually heard herself say buff instead of butt. Auntie Jen had gotten herself arrested, or detained, or whatever, too, by assaulting a law officer, which was, in Francie's opinion, a rather extreme interpretation of what had happened. Jeanette had flung herself on the sheriff and wrapped her arms around his neck, which, did nearly choke him, but still. Francie had peeled Jeanette off and apologized profusely to the sheriff, but to no avail. He'd hauled them in for questioning. "Do you think they're in terrible trouble?" Francie asked Nels. "No," Nels said. "Rydell is... he's all right, really, but..." "He's all set to retire?" "Yup," Nels said. "He doesn't want to work too hard. This probably made him feel as if he was doing something. Now he has, and he'll probably let it go." "Let it go? Poisoning?" "I'm kind of surprised he even bothered to investigate at all." "Supposedly Buck is a friend of his." "Oh, yeah, that's right." Sandy appeared and said it was okay to borrow a boat for the evening. Her aunts had already asked, he said. During their dinner of crispy fried Sunnies, Francie had forgotten how good they were, and Astrid's unusual potato salad, in which Francie was hard-pressed to find a potato, her aunts told their own version of the story. They'd been serving the stragglers at the luncheon and were ready to put everything away when Buck came in. Astrid couldn't remember how that spatula came to be in her hand, but it was her spatula, or anyway, she had one like it, or she used to have one like it. At least she thought she did. At any rate, Jeanette said, she didn't like to say it about anyone, but wasn't it true the world was better off without Buck? "I'm a little sad about Buck," Francie mused. "That's very sweet of you," Jeanette said. "I'm ashamed to say that there are those of us who aren't that sad." "It's not that I'm so sweet, really," Francie said, "but Buck told me he was going to tell me something about my mother." A look of concern flicked across both her aunts' faces. Nels just looked confused. "What kind of thing?" Astrid said. "I don't know," Francie cried, "and now I'll never know." "I can't imagine he could have known anything about her," Jeanette said. "He probably said that to keep you from talking." "Maybe," Francie mumbled. "Well, now that he's gone, we won't have to worry any more," Astrid added and smacked her lips. "You might have to worry about being arrested for murder," Francie said. "Oh, that," Jeanette said. "That's just ridiculous. Isn't it, Astrid?" Astrid didn't answer. "Astrid," Jeanette said, "didn't you hear me? I said it's ridiculous for you to be arrested for murder. Rydell will come to his senses and see it couldn't be you." Nels had been amazingly silent throughout the conversation, Francie thought. but he did seem to be busy picking bones out of his fish. "What kind of hot dish did you make for the funeral, Astrid?" Francie asked, holding her breath for the answer. "Why, I made salmagundi, of course," she answered, and all four of them breathed again. "With tuna," she finished. "Well, did you poison it?" Francie asked. Nell snorted, so he was paying attention. "Of course not," Astrid said. "Where did it go?" "The poison?" "The hot dish," Francie said. "Gone," Astrid said. "You mean all eaten up?" Francie asked. "No," Astrid answered. "I mean gone as in poof. I don't know." "What did the dish look like?" Nels asked. "The casserole dish?" Astrid said. "It was that brown pottery one with fish swimming around the sides of it, with a lid, of course." Francie thought of Mrs. Smattering and Mrs. Hanson clucking over a casserole in the parking lot of the church. Had it been a brown pottery dish? Francie wished she'd paid closer attention. Her TV detective character would have noticed something like that. Why wasn't Francie more like her? Later, Francie walked Nels out onto the dock. "Isn't it kind of dark to drive a boat?" she said. "It's got lights." He jumped in and switched on the lights. "See," he said. "Red on the port side, green on the starboard side." He reached for the ignition. She said. She said again. "Idiot. Would you like to talk? I mean, I could really use some help." "Help?" "There's so much weirdness around here. All these people dying." "What?" He looked up at her. "Listen, do you want some watermelon?" That was stupid. "Watermelon? Sure." Nels climbed out of the boat while she retrieved a watermelon from the spring where it had been chilling. It was so cold she could barely hold it. She grabbed a big knife from the boathouse and said, "Come on, we can go sit on the roof." They climbed the path that wound around to the flat roof of the little house. A railing of dubious safety ran around the perimeter of the deck, which was furnished with some rickety chairs and a table that wobbled as she sliced open the watermelon. She handed a big chunk to Nels and took one for herself, and they leaned, carefully, on the railing, spitting seeds down into the lake. "Didn't I see you at that party at the Fredricksons?" Francie asked. He nodded. "Why?" "Why what?" he said. "Why were you there?" she asked. "Why were you there?" "I asked you first." "Well," he said, "there's this girl." Right, Francie thought. It figured. It was always this way. There was always a girl. "Oh," she said. "Lettice?" "No," he said. "I don't think you've met her." He cleared his throat. "She—" "Never mind," Francie cut him off. "It's none of my business." She felt the usual disappointment and then a little wavelet of relief. Her heart would remain unthreatened inside its silver box. The evening was still. They sat on the rickety chairs for a while, listening to the small sounds along the lake shore. It was so quiet you could hear the clatter of dishes and the tinkling of silverware being washed after dinner, the soft closing of screen doors, even voices from far down the way. Francie spoke quietly as she began to tell Nels about the strange deaths along the shore, about Buck's confession, if that's what it had been, about her aunt's suspicions, about Warren's death, supposedly a suicide, and now this, Buck poisoned. "Tell me what happened at the funeral," Nels said. "Buck arrived late," Francie said. "I saw him drive up and take a piss in the parking lot while talking on his cell phone." Nels laughed at this. "I thought he was probably going to pretend that he'd been at the funeral, but he was pretty late. He had to eat after everyone else had finished." It was a hot day. Could he have just eaten a hot dish that had gone bad in the heat? But even then, he couldn't die that fast or at all, could he? The sheriff thinks that one of the hot dishes was poisoned, but where did the hot dish go? And why wasn't everyone poisoned? Do you think it's possible the ladies were? She stopped herself. A number of them have a motive, she murmured. What? Nell said. It could be almost anybody along this side of the lake. Mrs. Smattering, whose son was killed by the tree branch. Mrs. Hanson, whose husband drowned. And what about Mrs. Simonson, whose husband died of snake bite? She doesn't live here anymore, but that doesn't mean she might not murder someone. Or heck, maybe it was all of them. What are you talking about? Francie explained that maybe the elderly ladies had come up with a devious plan to knock Buck off. She had seen two of them chattering and clucking over a casserole dish together. Nell stroked his chin in mock seriousness and said, "Iocane powder. They've been eating it for years to build up an immunity, like the dread pirate Roberts, so they could partake in a poisoned hot dish." "Yes," Francie said. It was a little uncanny how she and Nell seemed to think alike. She'd been thinking of that exact thing from one of her favorite movies, The Princess Bride. He would like the same movies she did. "Okay, but seriously," she said, "how was it that only Buck keeled over dead after the funeral lunch? I mean, if there was a poisoned hot dish, wouldn't there be a lot of dead people now?" "You'd have to think so," Nels agreed. Francie squeezed her eyes shut and tried to remember what and who she'd seen. Sandy had left in a hurry. Potter had been in a rush, but he had paused to stroke Ginger's arm. Ginger had seemed nervous, but she often did. Then Francie had gotten so distracted with the Fredericksons, she probably missed seeing the murderer, missed all the clues. She really was a lousy detective. "You're mulling pretty hard over there," Nell said. She laughed ruefully. "There was one point when I thought I had it all figured out and thought maybe I should be a detective, that I was so good at it." "You're doing all right," Nell said, laying a hand on her arm, which caused a little electricity to pulse through her. "Did you say Buck took a call on his cell?" he asked. "Yeah." "What did he say?" "Not much." She thought back. "Let's see. He said something like, 'You and I don't see what the big deal is, but believe me, this is exactly the kind of thing people get all worked up about.'" "What was he talking about?" "Beats me." "It should be easy enough to find out who called him. I'll see what I can do tomorrow." "Do you think the sheriff will arrest Astrid?" she asked. "Pretty skimpy evidence. Poison on a spatula. Could have been anyone's spatula. Anyone could have tampered with a hot dish, or, for that matter, the food on a spatula." Francie leapt up. "Come on," she said, grabbing Nels's hands and pulling him out of his chair. "What? Where are we going?" Francie pulled a flashlight out of her jacket pocket and flicked it on. "Let's see if we can find this hot dish. The last place it was seen was the church. Let's start there and see if we can either find it or find a clue or something." "Even if we find it, I'm not sure it'll be worth much as evidence anymore. Anyway, won't the church be locked at this hour?" he asked. "Yeah, you're probably right." Francie chewed her lip. "I know. Ginger. She teaches Sunday school. Maybe she has a key. Let's go find her."